Some transformations collapse under their own ambition. Others fade, not in rebellion, but in silence. But the ones that stick, they begin with something deeper. They begin with trust. Trust is not a reward, it is a precondition. And when it is absent, no amount of capital, talent, or design will make the change stick. Too often, we mistake trust for harmony, for alignment, for loyalty. But trust is not passive. It's not soft. It is infrastructure. Hi, I'm Mirza Chuktai, and this is part one of the Long Arc, a leadership series on transformation that sticks. Today, we begin where all lasting change begins, with trust. Not the kind that shows up after the results, but the kind that precedes them, that invites challenge, welcomes perspective, and turns pressure into clarity. Without trust, strategy stays stuck on a whiteboard, and with it, execution scales, even in the face of uncertainty. So here's the problem: trust is too often confused with loyalty, a subtle but dangerous dynamic. When loyalty becomes the proxy, principled, outcome focused collaboration gets replaced with quiet compliance. Respectful disagreement is traded for conformity. Teams speak the language of alignment, but operate with hesitation. You get polite rooms, nodding heads, muted insights, beautiful decks quietly sabotaged by unspoken misalignment. And strategies that die, not in rebellion, but in silence. Here's where it gets even harder. Research shows leaders who equate trust with loyalty often hesitate to bring in outside talent. Not because the person is not capable, but because they don't yet feel trustworthy. Without a framework to extend trust intentionally, loyalty becomes the only yardstick. And fresh perspective, well, it starts to feel like a threat. But the best teams I have witnessed, the ones that perform, share the same characteristics. They don't trade honesty for harmony. They surface tensions with care. They challenge direction early, not to derail, but to refine. And when a decision is made, they stand behind it together. These are not signs of dysfunction. They're signals of something rare. A culture where clarity outranks comfort, where respectful disagreement sharpens direction, and where trust is not hoarded, it's practiced. So, how do you build that kind of trust at scale and under pressure? Three practices that I keep returning to. Let's start with number one. Let me explain. One of the biggest sources of team disengagement is not workload, it's confusion. When people do not understand why decisions were made or how priorities were shaped, they don't just feel excluded, they feel expendable. I've seen this play out not just in IT, but in HR, finance, sales, operations, basically across the board. Top performers start second guessing themselves. Middle managers burn cycles trying to decode silence. And promising contributors begin to disengage. Not because they're unwilling, but because they're unclear. But when leaders share the principles behind the policies, the reasons behind the roadmap, it changes everything. People don't just follow orders, they step into ownership. They connect their effort to the enterprise. They bring their ideas because now the system invites them in. People rarely resist structure, they resist obscurity. Transparent principles cut through all of that. They show the team that the rules are not there to restrict them, but they are there to protect the work and elevate the outcome. Because when decisions are clear, team ownerships follow. Number 2, start with setting guardrails that liberate your team. At the most senior technology leadership level, accelerating innovation is not about unleashing chaos. It's about setting intelligent boundaries and trusting your teams to move within those boundaries. Here's a real example. In large-scale organizations, you're often dealing with hundreds, sometimes thousands of software and hardware solutions that are spread across a dozen or more functional domains. The question is not how do we control this? It is how do we enable innovation without breaking cohesion? The answer is guardrails. Each domain is free to innovate within its own ecosystem. But those innovations must align to the enterprise reference architecture and integrate seamlessly with incumbent solutions. This is not bureaucracy, it's alignment at scale. When teams operate within these boundaries, they're rewarded with faster approvals, accelerated funding, and greater autonomy. But when proposals fall outside these boundaries, whether in architecture, security posture, or even AI use policy, they trigger closer scrutiny. Not to punish, but to protect the broader system. Because now you're not just introducing a new solution, you're introducing a new variable. And that variable could impact everything from data quality to compliance to ethical engineering standards. See, guardrails don't limit creativity. They sharpen it and translate trust into systems thinking. Number 3, a commitment to collective ownership. Let me explain. Once the alignment is reached, we must execute as one. No second guessing in the hallways, no triangulation through side channels. This is not performance, it is trust in motion. Let's take hybrid multi-cloud adoption as an example. The decision to standardize on native tools versus adopting a unified management layer across cloud providers often sparks real tension. Infrastructure wants control, application teams want flexibility, security needs visibility, and finance needs to track cost across every single domain. Everyone brings valid concerns, but not everyone gets their way. But once the path is chosen together, the commitment must follow. That's where trust shows up, not just in the decision making process, but in how we carry it forward. Collective ownership means we don't revisit the debate behind closed doors. We lock arms and we move forward. Because collective ownership is not about universal agreement, it's about shared conviction once the decision has been made. Trust doesn't need echo chambers. It needs spaces where people can show up fully with their integrity, their ideas, and their energy intact. Because trust is not the loudest lever, but it is the one that makes all the others work. Thanks for watching. Let's keep building the kind of leadership that makes transformation stick. I'm Mirza Chuktai, and see you in part 2.